Welcome to day two. I'm Michael Busler. I'll be chairing the session. We have two keynote speakers today. The first one is Professor Sonny Nwankwo from University of East London. You can read about his bio. So with that, I'll just introduce him and ask him to come up here. Let him speak. We'll save the questions for the end. Okay, thank you.
Good morning, everybody. I am quite delighted to be speaking this morning on a very important topic, which I feel particularly passionate about. My passion also derives from my new role, and which is as the director of a new Center for Equality and Diversity. And what that has meant for me, basically, is that I've become once again a student of society, how different groups are engaged in popular discourses, how groups are excluded from popular discourses, and how they get reconnected to those sort of discourses. So I'm particularly happy that this association chose a very topical-ish theme for this year. Actually, when I saw that, I thought, this is really nice. It is not one of those topics where we begin to exhibit our skills in calculative or analytical, but something that strikes us and confronts us on a day-to-day basis. So when I'm looking at the call for paper, which I'll be speaking to actually, it says the conference will be focused on questions about what policies makers actually do or need to know, and talks about what exactly we are trying to sustain and so on and so forth. And I thought, wow, this is pretty interesting. Not too long ago, I saw a snippet from the Footprint Network. It says there are measures of ecological footprint. It says humans have used up the natural resources the earth can provide for the year. That was way back, how many months ago? A few months ago. And then I thought, who are these humans? And then kept using the word we. And I said, who are we? Who are the humans? Do we share the same aspirations? Do we share the same views? And I thought, well, interestingly, I will probably need to probe this a little bit more to see what exactly we're talking about. And in this instance, I've been traveling a lot, actually, through my travels through West Africa and Southern Africa. And I thought, well, of course, from our previous research, we know that there are contentions, there are contestations, there are serious tensions in how we frame discourses about sustainable development. But I thought perhaps on a simple idiosyncratic basis, using a sample of convenience, I needed to tense up, probably see what people are really saying. So I chose three groups ranging from people I met in Ghana, Accra, in Nigeria, Namibia, and Southern Africa. Classify this into three, as you could possibly see. The youthful population, these are people who are already students and undertaking postgraduate students. And that my whole idea was to have a feeling, a sense of what they really understand by sustainable development. And this is critically important because, as you very well know, the MDG is coming to an end very soon, 2015, I suppose. And there is an argument for SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals. So whether the MDG is going to be collapsed into SDG, nobody knows. But that discussion is going on, which, again, I will encourage this August gathering to begin to perhaps take a position paper about our contribution to framing that goal, because the chance, that window of opportunity is still there. So in the run-up to that discussion, I thought perhaps let's see what these groups are saying. So for the youth, what it's really saying is, for me, it's a reflection of what we call politics of the self. For those of you in the Foucauldian school, you'll be familiar with those sort of dialectics. And I thought, what exactly does that mean to you? It says, life is a struggle. I'm trying to live for today. So you can understand this. People who are coming from backgrounds of relative deprivation, where unemployment rate is exceedingly high, And then you're talking about protection of the future climate. For them, these are simple, if you like, idealism more than what reflects their own reality. These people are trying to negotiate today, to live today, to echo out the existence of today. Not to say that they are impervious to the goings on around the globe. But that narrative is important because it helps us to develop a kind of understanding that may conform or deviate from the normative representation of sustainable development discourse. Then I also talked to a different group, or the academics. And this is really interesting. The group you thought perhaps would be in the know, as they say, very knowledgeable, could critically contribute to discourse in a way of trying to extend the boundaries. But then what I found was they are more likely their understanding seems to be couched in rhetorics. But that is different from the youthful population because they have the wisdom, the power, the knowledge behind them based on their prior training. So it was more about trying to navigate the realms of theoretic possibilities. So for them, these are theorizations, idealisms, framed somewhere else. So there again, we begin to see we are not the ones polluting the earth, distancing themselves. These are people who are supposed to inculcating and embedding sustainability into the curriculum. So, but it is not our problem. We didn't pollute the environment. They are the polluters, we are the polluted. So we begin to see those kind of discourses. And then the seniors, for the seniors I meant people I'm a senior, but seniors people were a bit older than myself, 75, 80, and the rest of them retired. But there was a different kind of narrative. There was more of victims. The one particular phrase that really caught my attention was when one of them said, when we were rich. And I was very keen to know what that meant, when we were rich. And that was a kind of cultural atavism relating back to the past when the gentleman was saying to me that if you lost your wallet on the road, somebody will pick it up and hang it by the roadside. If you walk back the same day or next day, you pick it up. That it was communality, had the sense of community, everybody looking after everyone else. And also what was interesting was the cultural capital that was embedded in societal mechanisms. For instance, the streams were unpolluted because they believed that the gods, the ancestors, the spirits lived in those streams in the forest. And those forests and streams were never to be violated. So they were, in fact, the greatest protectors of their own ecosystem. So now you have this sense of modernity, and that's saying that these days you can walk freely in security, you have access to electricity that is never reliable, and so on and so forth, and all those sort of hazards and so on and so forth. So you now begin to see some sort of discordant tone, and I said, oh, this seems to be interesting. So what sense do we make of this as we work ourselves towards framing a new agenda for sustainable development goals? So what we now begin to see that representations of sustainable development seems to be well rooted in Western subjectivities. That is their understanding. So in a way, they feel there's a bit of ethnocentrism in how this ideal has been framed. Real or imagined, our position was not to test the validity of their feelings, but to reflect the world in which they live. And their explanations seems to be local specific. In other words, the realities of their own immediate environment was more important than what was going on in Washington or in Rio or in Johannesburg, all those ex-summit and all of those. They seem so detached from those sort of discourses. And what also became apparent was that opinions, languages, and meanings seems to be poorly communicated to the people and poorly understood by the people at the local level. So you now have what I call the tendency towards the art of graceful exit, because it's comfortable to self-exclude. That's self-exclusion, a process of self-exclusion. So what we now begin to summarize is that countries in sub-Saharan Africa have become bystanders in the whole global discourse. Forget about what government representatives say in Washington and when they're invited. Sometimes they are happy to simply go take photographs, shake hands, and walk away. But there at the grassroots, people are so very disconnected. But as a scholar, what really interested me was, again, using this Foucauldian canon, if you like, putting it through the canons of social constructivism, is the kind of resistive discourse, the transformative discourse that is beginning to emerge, because people are resisting what the dominant discourse is. And I think this is not a bad thing. It is good in the sense that we now have an opportunity to rephrase and perhaps create what I think people need to align to, because there is no ownership. The ownership is detached from formulation. Again, this is the classic policy formulation and implementation discourse. So if you widen the issue a little bit, what I call the politics of knowing, I guess that a complex and hugely controversial subtopic like sustainable development lends itself to two levels of meaning. At the very first level will be the morals, the values that are often encapsulated in framing a decision. Very simple definition. Sometimes vague, but it has some kind of resonance. This is a kind of what Bertrand used in this definition. I thought I wrote it down somewhere. I'm not sure I can find it. It says, his conception of development. It says, development that makes the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. Well, that itself leaves open a very unanswered question. But at the second level of meaning, if you moved away from those catchphrases and popular slogans, are those, if you like, taken for granted assumptions are very often embedded in discourses. And those taken for granted assumptions are very important because they reflect what people genuinely think, the real feelings of the people. But what we know from this is that the whole concept, the whole meaning is controversial and very political. Because it's controversial, you have multiple prisms, different lenses through which you read the same phenomenon, leading to different interpretation, different understanding, different groups of interest, sometimes contradictory interest, and so on and so forth. That's the whole gamut of complexities with which this particular subject is often enmeshed in. And then you see also that it's a discursive space with different actors, all jostling for position, as I will probably show in a short while. Unfortunately, I wanted to show some photographs, so that images, but because of ethical reasons, I'm going to leave that for the future where I can bring those pictorial representations. So in a way, it signals a theoretic approach, an approach which recognizes productive and performative nature of discourse. Meaning that meaning, identity is not fixed in time, but varies in time and space. And this is very important because what it does do therefore is more and more it draws us back towards some sort of contextual richness in program formulation, how we formulate our programs. And importantly also, it's about the methodology, which again, like I said, was going to speak to the call for paper. The methodologies which we use. It is quite easy to go for some of the things that we do see very often in policy papers. Some of us have become avid enumerators. Once you can put a number, you can put statistics, everybody thinks that this is wonderful, this is great, it's convincing, the case is made. But as Einstein once tells us, or once said to us, not everything that is counted counts, right? And not everything that is measured has meaning in a way that imparts mankind. So what we now begin to see from broader discourse is the multiple rationality, the divergent views, which again, we all know this from the literature. Different opinions ranging from government circles, from the industrialists, from technologists, and so on and so forth. All these they represent, if you like, sites of knowledge construction and dissemination. And this is why I actually like the whole idea of Foucault in trying to, and social constructionism, in trying to unravel this complex phenomenon. This is because it relates discursive formation in systems of power. Who gets to define what? How do we legitimize knowledge? When does knowledge become knowledge? Who decides what the program should be about? In other words, we now begin to see a kind of polarity. Somebody who controls what is known, what is accepted, what becomes legitimate, and then who also is the other group who are so expected to be what? To join in, because the knowers have decided what should be known. So these are the sort of contentions we are facing with. So we are no closer after 10 years or so to knowing what sustainable development is, or what it should be about, or what we are trying to sustain, just like the days when it was newly framed, which was why I think that it is now becoming important for us to begin to decide how we can indeed contribute to this discourse. So what we begin to see happen is a kind of the program becoming a model of general application. Here it is, the world has agreed that every government will go to their respective countries and implement it. So it becomes program-driven. Because it's program-driven, there is no philosophical embeddedness to it. I always say to people in research for is that there's always a kind of causative link between philosophy, policies, and practice. If you take away philosophy, practice will be a simply latch-on activity and will change from day to day. But when you have a philosophical underpinning, that guides principle. So whatever you do will be, as they say, principled action. And there's also the ontological question, the knowledge of construction, which I talked about, the institutionalization and funding question. Anything that is worthy at all is worthy well. And again, you're going to ask the question, where is the money going to come from? So where do we go from here? The question remains, what should it be about? We now know that it is not exactly what is meant or is intended to be. What will be the key outputs, key deliverables? Who are the post holders? Are they going to be able to disseminate this money, share it perhaps more widely so that everybody will become part of the global community, as we say? And by the way, our actions value for money is quite easy for us to say that the oil resources will dry up in 50 years, or there will be no water, or there will be this. That's fine. At least Malthus told us that many, many years ago, but human life is, we are still here. We have not all died. But that is not to say that we are not facing problem. So I'm coming from a position that perhaps as academics, we really need to take a kind of inside out look of the whole phenomenon. And I'm thinking about issues like agency, human agency to construct their own future, because it's something we have always neglected. We are looking at cultural perspective, something that reflects each individual's or each country's or each group's or community's perspective, the institutional perspective, power relations, social capital. These are very important. So what am I saying here? What I'm saying, therefore, is that for any program to be meaningful, to be widely accepted, it has to be drilled down to the local level where these actions are taking place. Very often, it's not the governments that, if you take environmentalism, for example, it is not governments or people in Washington that causes deforestation. These are people who are situated on the ground. When big loggers move to Congo, they're going to pay local chiefs, gatekeepers, they get a little bit of money and say, okay, we invite you in. But when these people are educated, when they are aware and sensitive enough, then they can become, in fact, great safeguard for these great resources. So if we use that as a starting point, for me, it's more of truly trying to map out the strategic DNA, which begins with the individual, the dominant logic. This is the logic that filters all these contentions we have been reading about for over 10 years. Because each individual or each group have the power to resolve to reconstruct or reconstitute meanings as it relates to them. Because when they do, what you then begin to see will be a more positive alignment between between person and environment. I call them person-environment congruence, because that's basically what it's all about. Because in my abstract, I did say that the whole concept of SD is simply about what we have done to the world we live in, and what the world we live in is doing to us as people who inhabit this world. It is just trying to bring together this polarity and see whether they can make any significant progress. So if that engagement is consolidated, then we begin to see some key thrusts. This will be the beginning for formulating any sensible SD agenda. So towards a new SDG, Sustainable Development Goals, whether, like I said, is going to be part of the MDG or not, we'll need a bit more reflexivity. In a way, setting parameters for economic development, which we understand is very good, but I'll try very much to avoid economic development as a principal determinant for some obvious reason. But what is important will be the extent of social inclusion, empowerment of diverse population, labor market opportunities, diversification of the economy, sustainability, environment. These are very important. It's interesting that businesses are now beginning to brace up to the concept of sustainability. Again, it's going to go the way of social responsibility. Whether this is going to be genuine effort remains a very open question. But for me, if we don't deal with some of these undercurrents, what you are likely going to see will be continuous migration of population groups. No amount of policy will deter people from moving from one country to another. People are prepared to die in the sea, swimming through the ocean, if that's what it would take in order to get to where they find better sources of livelihood. So no barriers can keep people away. And then we're going to continue to see tension, political tension, social tensions, which is why I'm now moving more and more to moving away from using economic development base as a premise for framing sustainable development, but rather we're going to start with individual type action. Because if we didn't do what, again, we are trying to allude to, it might lead to what we call the backwash effect. It is possible to have growth without development. I think this is probably clearer enough. So I was quite enthralled when I was trying to look through and say, how come nobody else? Is it me alone? Am I just kind of alone in this sort of way? I found this indicative list of SDGs. This was proposed by Colombia, Peru, and United Arab Emirates, UAE, and I thought, well, food security, these are the sort of issues I think will be important. These are what people care about. These are the things that touch people on their day-to-day living. You could also see that they have not tried to include environment in this particular discourse, because the whole idea of environment has become more or less political polemic, right? But it is not to say that environment is not important. That's saying that UN, under UNFCCC, will deal with that and perhaps unpack that level of meaning. But to be able to get agreement and remove this idea of who are the polluters and who are the non-polluters, let's take the environment out, but let us deal with issues that relate to people on day-to-day basis. From that as a point of departure, I frame up what I call the triple bottom line, which is the human capital, natural capital, and technology. That's, for me, that's what it's all about. Human capital. Companies are societal institutions. Once you have human capital, people are scaled up and so on and so forth, we begin to see the economy growing. Economy should not be the number one agenda. But if you empower people that they can live, not this either, I think the world actually should be ashamed that some people live under $1 a day, with all the multinationals operating in those environments where people live under $1 a day. And yet they go to Rio Summit and talk about sustainable development and so on and so forth. That shouldn't be happening. So for me, if you achieve that, poverty eradication, sustained prosperity, so that the wealth of the world could be balanced out, then we begin to see more, perhaps, greater level of sensitivity to natural capital, because of course these are the core planetary resources. Everybody, every society, every culture has got views about how to protect their environment. The Amazonians and so on and so forth, before they open up to the world, had their own cultural processes, the ways they protect their own. These are cultural capital that are already they established over time and history. So I'm not sure that it makes any sense to go teach them a story, a lesson they actually ought to be teaching the world, basically. But rather, what the world is doing is to turn the story around and make these people ignorant of what they know and what has been useful over time. I also think that technology is extremely important. I think this is an area where LAM has been doing some work now. But one important thing about technology is that we have to be very careful the sort of technology we are promoting. Here we make the distinction between competency-destroying technology and competency-enhancing technology. By competency-destroying, I mean the sort of things Monsanto was trying to do, a great company, a leader in innovation, but it forgot that innovation is about people. So when people reacted, what could have been a breakthrough technology became a liability. Because what Monsanto did was an excellent innovation in terms of ensuring food security, in terms of controlling, in terms of regenerating. But again, they came out of the lab and said, here, the world, we got it. This is a good idea. We like it, therefore you must also like it. And that backfired. So I'm thinking about innovation value chain. Wherein in human cycle does innovation add value? It's not a question of trying to manufacture human parts or trying to convert pigs to become sheep. But it's about wherein does it add value in the human ecosystem. And underlying that is what I call the cross-cutting theme, good governance. We found in previous research that where you have good governance, the society gets better off. In other words, there is a relationship between political liberalization, political stability enhancement, and if economic growth is the choice, the term you want to use, fine. But there is a causative link. But systems where you have very corrupt or military oligarchies lording it over their own people or mass gassing them or killing them, that is, in fact, one way to kill off a community, a society. So I think that good governance underpins all those critical areas. And also came across trying to figure all of this out. The work done by a group of scholars, Greeks and so on and so from Australia, actually, and they kind of, what the issues they talked about resonated with me. Thriving lives and livelihood, sustainable food security. I thought, well, this is what it's all about. It may well be that the world is beginning to wake up to what really matters, and indeed what should embed sustainable development. The economy is embedded in all of this, as opposed to previous discourse where we think is about securing economic growth and so on and so forth. Of course, there is a strong body of scholars who now saying that economic growth, when you have economic growth, natural capital declines. In other words, there is an inverse relationship, whether this is truth or so, but of course you do have empirical evidence. But in this day and age, what is empirical and what is not empirical is open to conjecture, or you can say anything you want with statistics, but what is important is how do people feel, which is why I think in framing this SDG goal, we now have to move back more and more towards social constructionism so that we can relate to people on more careful basis. So by and by, what I'm really saying basically is about creating a level playing field. Those who have should be able to help those who don't have, not by way of charity, but by way of empowerment. Those who have studied technology transfer systems we know that that is simply a mirage. It hasn't happened, right? So it's all about how you deal with all of those things in a way that we begin to see a fairer society, a society we'll be happy to live in wherever we are located, whether it's in Accra, Lagos, Johannesburg, or London, or Washington, a society we can be proud of, not perhaps a society where we begin to see that these groups are only good for production of raw materials, and then we deal with them and then give them the finished product. So my triple bottom line, therefore, next in a definition I picked from Greek and Code, it says development that meets the needs of the present while safeguarding the Earth's life support system on which the welfare of current and future generations depends. It's just a little bit move away from Brutland. It may well be that this is sort of narrative that we'll begin to talk about. But the new paradigm I'm talking about will be this kind of natural capital, human capital, technology, the ones that are to value chain. So that if you see where we are all started, from the MGGs towards the SDG, if it begins in 2015, which is less than 2 years, so it's all about how do we deal with people and planet, the coming together of people and planet in order to achieve a fairer, better society, thriving lives and livelihood, food security, water, clean energy, health, reproductive system, governance for sustainable society. These are what seems to be important. I'm not saying, of course, you realize that I have not marginalized the discourse of economic development. It is enmeshed in all of this. If you pull it together, it will obviously come together. I borrowed this particular slide from Alam some time ago, but it helps me to really to summarize my talk this morning. The world we live in, what we do into the world, how do we ameliorate or guide our actions. It's about partnership, building together in order to improve our knowledge base, in order to relate to the lives of people whose basic existence or bare existence are affected by actions which we take wherever we might be, whether in developed or developing countries. Because to perhaps presume that those problems do not exist is simply to play the ostrich game, hiding our heads in the sand when the problem continues to mount. So I'm probably going to stop here for now, and then I thank you very much indeed.